Hey friends, Patrick here. We already covered CRUD with Blazor, SSR and .NET 8, so only static server-side rendering, no WebSockets with Blazor Server, no WebAssembly with, well, Blazor WebAssembly. And in this tutorial now, I want to cover Blazor Server. So the server or render mode, how would that work? All CRUD operations, create, read, update and delete. Let's go. But maybe first, if you learned something and like this tutorial, please guys hit the like button and please think about subscribing to that channel here. There is this great little button, it says subscribe, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it would mean the world to me if you do, because it helps creating all these videos. So thank you very much for doing that, and thank you very much to all my patrons for supporting me. I love every single one of you guys. Thank you so much. If you want to support me too, link is in the video description. And now let's start with the tutorial. All right, Blazor Server it is today, and we create a new project for that and use the Blazor web app template here. And now we give this thing a beautiful name like Blazor Server CRUD.NET 8. This is a great name. And now .NET 8, of course, no authentication, HTTPS, but this thing now is important. We only want the server or render mode for the interactivity. Location is all right, per page component. Of course, you could also choose global. In that case, you would use WebSockets everywhere, but maybe you just want to use WebSockets for certain components or pages like an EditForm, as you will see in this tutorial. We include the sample pages, I mean, why not? So we have some code that we can maybe use, but when everything is created, this is what we've got, all right? We have projects that can display a user interface, right? Typical Blazor server stuff, as you maybe know it from .NET 7 and before. And also we are on the server here. This means we have all the .NET Web API capabilities, for instance. And this means what we can also do here is, of course, already create a model and also a data context, because what I want to use is Entity Framework here together with SQL Server to store the data persistently in a SQL Server database. So I suggest we just start right away with all the Entity Framework boilerplate stuff. If you don't want to see that, check out the time codes below in the video description, and then you can jump directly to the components that we will build in the pages, where we then will use the EditForm. All right, so first, new folder, and for that, call this models. I love video games. I have no time to play video games anymore because I have 2 kids and lots of work, but I still love them. So let's create video games in this tutorial. So here now, rather simple, we say this thing gets an ID, and then also maybe a title. What I also want to display is the publish, and the last thing, nope, not string, would be the release year, let's say. All right, so this is our video game, and now already the data context for, or the database context for Entity Framework. Again, I create a new folder for that. And by the way, of course, you could here now already start with another type of architecture. We could create class libraries for the models, for the database context, and so on. So if clean architecture is something you want to see, please tell me that in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to create such a video for you. But here now, we keep this rather simple. We create a data context. That's the one. We now inherit from DB context, and with control period, we get the suggestion to install this package here. That's exactly what we want. Entity Framework Core, still used the name, or still uses the name Core. With that, we've got Entity Framework installed, and now we need a constructor first. So CTOR and hit tab to create that constructor with the parameter DB context options builder. With our new data context here, we call this options, and when you have a little bit more space, we can use the base constructor here. And we get an error because this is the wrong parameter. It's only DB context options. So now everybody is happy, in particular Visual Studio. What else do we need? Well, a database set to have representation of our video games in the database. So for that, we create a new property of type DB set and then use our new video game class here. And we simply pluralize the name. This is then the name of our table. And let's also already seed the data. For that, we override the method on model creating. And here now we say model builder and then entity. And here it shall be the video game class. And this thing now has some data, and here we can simply give this thing a list, and maybe I will just edit this out so you don't have to watch the entire thing. So first game, ID 1. All right, so we have 3 games, IDs 1, 2, and 3. Cyberpunk 2077 by CD Projekt 2020 is the release, then Elden Ring 2022, and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 1998. Okay, so this is our data. Now the next step is to add a connection string, and usually we just do that in our app settings JSON file. So in here we say connection strings, then default connection, and here we call that or we give this thing first the server. I'm using SQL Server Express locally, so if you don't have it, just Google for it please, and then download it, and then you should be able to use the same connection string. Database name is up to you, so in my case that would be the video game DB, for instance. Then we set the trusted connection to true, and also trust server certificate also true. This should be the connection string. And the last part now is our program CS, because there we have to register the data context and use a SQL Server provider. But for that we first need to install a NuGet package. So we already have Entity Framework Core, but we need again the SQL Server provider. And this is this package here, Microsoft SQL Server Database Provider for Entity Framework Core. So let's install that thing. And then since I want to use code first migrations, I also need the tools package here. So just search for tools, and then we should find Microsoft Entity Framework Core tools, Entity Framework Core tools for the NuGet Package Manager console in Visual Studio. That's it. And now the DB context. So for that we say builder in the program CS, builder services, and then add DB context with the data context here. And of course we want to use our data context. And also we set some options, which in essence is necessary to tell our app that we want to use SQL Server, as you can see here. And we also need the connection string. And since we're using the app settings JSON file, we can say builder configuration, get connection string, and then simply the default connection, and add one more parenthesis, and we are done. All right, with that now we can open the package manager console and simply say add migration initial, for instance, because with that we create the initial migration, which should include the video games table. Build succeeded. This is great. And now we see this is the new file that was created for us. You can also see it here, new folder, migrations, initial. And this just means when we apply this migration, we will create a new table called video games with all our columns, auto incrementing the ID, and also already insert some data. And in case you want to roll back, we just drop that table. I say this is great. So now we run the command update database. Yes, even when the database does not exist. We run this, build succeeded, and we will then see there they are, all the commands that will be executed here. For instance, create table, video games, and we now go, for instance, to the SQL Server Management Studio, refresh our server here, and then we see the video game database with the video games table. We can open that up and select top or edit top to 100 rows, for instance, and there are our games. Isn't that nice? Okay, boilerplate, entity framework, code first migration stuff is done. And now let's focus on the actual CRUD part here in Blazor. So as you can see, we have the layouts folder for the main layout and the nav menu. Real quick, I'm currently creating a .NET 8 Web Dev Jumpstart course, which will be available for free. We're going to have a look at web APIs and entity framework there, for instance. And if you want to be the first to know when this thing is available, then I recommend just check out the link in the video description and I will send you an email when you can get it. So scroll a bit further down and then you know what to do. And now let's continue with the tutorial. Not very interesting for us today. Well, at least maybe we should add a link to the video games page. But here now in the pages folder, and when you've seen the Blazor static server-side rendering tutorial with all the CRUD operations, then maybe this is familiar for you. So here now, let's just add a new Razor component. Call this a video games overview. All right, and this is a page, so similar to this weather page here. And as you can see, for that we use the page directive, and when you have a look at the counter page, then you see that we could use the render mode interactive server. To make this work, we need the following in the program CS. As you can see here, we have this line, add interactive server components, and down here also add interactive server render mode. So this is crucial. This is what you need if you want to use the new server interactivity render mode with Blazor and .NET 8. Otherwise, you're not able to do that. You can still use static server-side rendering if you want, but if you want to use the interactivity with WebSockets, then this is what you have to do, okay? And otherwise, it's pretty much the same stuff, except the form looks a little bit different compared to SSR, to Blazor static server-side rendering, but we'll see that in a couple of minutes. Now first, the basic overview. We add the page directive with the games route, let's say. And now what I want to do is I want to display all the games. So for that, we have a couple of options actually. First thing we definitely need is a list of video games, of course. So here now, we just say list video game, almost video game. This is the type we want. Wrong command, and this we can actually move to our imports Razor file. So now it's available for us. This is the video game type. Hopefully Visual, yep, no, Visual Studio got it. And again, this is a new list of video games. Now the question is, first, we have to fill this list. For that, we collect, wait, we give this first a name. For that, we collect the video games from the database in the onInitialized async method. So the lifecycle method, the very first lifecycle method of any Blazor component is the onInitialized. So override it is. This did not work. Maybe now. Yep, that's the one. And here we also add the async keyword. And here now, what we could do is we could use the database context directly. And I did that in the Blazor static server-side rendering tutorial. But this time, maybe let's organize this a little bit more. So what we can do is create a service, register the service then, and use this thing to collect the data. It's just a little bit more organized that way, okay? So what we can do here, again, in maybe a bit better architecture, we would have a class library again, split the interface and the implementation class. But now here, let's put everything into one project, but at least create another folder. So here we say services, all right? And here now we just add a new interface, call it EditVideoGame service. So this is our public interface. And now here we say add a new item, and this is the video game service, implementing the iVideoGame service, all right? And now here in the iVideoGame service, let's just add our very first method, which is, which has the return type task with a list of video games again. Add the reference here, get all games async maybe, all right? And here now we just implement this thing, perfect. And here now we use dependency injection to inject the data context. So here private read-only data context it is, that's the one. And with control and period we can either generate the constructor, or I already created it, so we can just add the parameter here to our constructor, and with that we have the context available. Now we add the async keyword here, and we can say for result is now await context video games, this is our table, and simply to list async, because with that now we get all the video games and we return the result. With that, our first get method is done in the service. We also have to register this thing. So similar to the database context, we can just say builder services add scope this time. And here this shall be the iVideoGame service. So this is the interface, and whenever we want to use this interface, we want to inject this interface, we say we want to use this implementation class. We could, for instance, also create a video game service 2 and then say, well, whenever we inject the iVideoGame service interface, always use this video game service 2. But that's maybe for another tutorial. Okay, so with that, this is a tiny bit more organized. And now when we go back to our page, the video games overview, we can here now say, I wanna inject the iVideoGame service, call this video game service, and here now add this reference also to the imports Razor file. So now we have the video game service hopefully available in a couple of seconds, maybe. Come on, Visual Studio. Well, let's just continue and see if this still works. And you know what we do is simply say our video games now is this video game service get all games async, and of course we want to await that like that. Great. Okay, with that we already get the games. We won't see that in Chrome, for instance, in the network tab, because we are not making a web service call. So I'm just telling you that because this is a big difference to Blazor WebAssembly from before .NET 8. Well, of course you can still build it like that, but if you're used to that with .NET 7 and now you're switching to .NET 8 and starting with Blazor, then you will notice that things are a bit different. Now the starting point is in essence Blazor server or even Blazor static server-side rendering. And then maybe the next step would be Blazor server. And then in the end, there comes Blazor WebAssembly. So you see, yeah, I don't know, the strategy of the .NET team or of Microsoft is a bit different, it seems, in my opinion. Tell me, what do you think about that? Would be interesting to read or hear your opinions on that. But anyways, this is how this works now. This is the first step. And now to see the data, well, of course, we have to show it somehow. And the easiest thing maybe would be, well, maybe a list. But of course, we could also add a table or a data grid, something like that. So I suggest we use a table. First, maybe the title, video games overview, or just video games like that. And then also page title is video games. And then the table. First, I did that already in another tutorial, but let's just check if the count of our video games is 0. In that case, I know this is, of course, it's not for production, right? This is not covering every situation, but just for this tutorial, if the count is 0, because we're seeding the data and I don't want to delete everything, then we just display the following loading video games. All right. And if we have some video games, then we display the table. Now this is a bit tedious, but let's just do that together. We first have the table with the table class, bootstrap stuff. All right. We have a header, and in this header, when this thing is formatted, we want to display a table row. All right, and then the first header would be the title. Then we display the publisher, and the last thing would be the release year. And after that, we also add an edit button and an edit link. Not an edit, a delete link or a delete button, maybe. Let's see about that. But anyways, after the header, now comes the actual data. So we have a T body. And here now we can make use of a for each loop. And here we just say for each game in our video games list. Again, we display a table row, almost table row it is, like that. Not an input radio, actually want a table row. I'm not sure why Visual Studio wants me to use an input radio. I'm just using a table row here. All right, hope this is okay. And now, not an input date, just a column like that. Great, thanks Visual Studio. And here now we say game title, and let me just copy that so I don't get the other suggestions. So here now we have the title, here we have the publisher, and the last thing shall be hopefully the release year. There it is, IntelliCode at its best. All right. And that should be it. Okay, so one last thing, nav menu. So we can go there actually. So here now we have games, and let's just call this also games. No icon this time because I'm lazy. Let's run this. All right, there we are. Now let's go to games, and there we are. Isn't it nice? We can go to home, to games, home, games. But something is missing, right? When we go to the console or open the console here, let's just refresh this. We see no WebSocket connection. Of course, we forgot one thing. With that, we still use Blazor static server-side rendering. Maybe you were already wondering what I am doing there, but I just want to show you it already works, right? And the only thing that you might have noticed when this app was starting and loading the games for the very first time, it took a while actually to come to that page, and we never see the loading text. Okay, now let's play around with that, because what we can do here, similar to the weather page, they simulate a delay. So now let's do that as well. Now there's the delay. We restart the application, and now you will see, well, maybe here not, but when we go to home and then to games, the address bar changes, but the page opens after half a second. All right, so again, home, I click here, address changes, and then comes the data. We don't see the loading text. So what we can do here now is either really, again, use stream rendering, and this is the great feature, or one of the great features of Blazor static server-side rendering. that we have this spa-like feeling. Now you see it loading video games. Again, I go to home and then I go to games. I directly open the page, or the application opens the page, and then we get the data after a certain while, right? Or we just use render mode interactive server, not moda. That's not correct. It's a render mode. So now we restart the application and we should see after a certain while, we see now there is this WebSocket connection. When we go back to home, the WebSocket connection should be, as you can see here, disconnected. Now we go back to games, but there was one more thing that maybe you already know, maybe you've seen it already. We have some kind of flickering effect. We go to home and then back to games and we see some data, then the loading text, and then again the data. Now what the heck is that? Well, pre-rendering is the magic word. So why is that? Pre-rendering is activated by default. This means that the server, it is confusing because we are already on the server, but the server runs the uninitialized async method once, right? Everything is done. The HTML page is rendered, and then this application sends the rendered or the finished HTML page to the client. And this is what we see. Maybe when we're lucky, we can also see that here actually when we filter for nothing in essence, and then open this page again. Then we see that we have some data here already, and this is what actually the static server-side rendering is, right? And when we're using now the render mode, the server render mode, then pre-rendering kicks in, meaning that we get this, but then we are entering the uninitialized again. So for the second time, we see all that loading video games logic, and then the data is collected and again displayed for the client or to the client, to the user, you name it. Strange, right? So, I mean, this makes sense if you have real interactivity here. If you have buttons, for instance, or charts, anything where the user can click and do something, I guess maybe then this makes sense. But for this example now, we don't really need pre-rendering, all right? Another option or another point is, of course, a valid point is SEO, search engine optimization. So if you want to use that, then maybe pre-rendering makes sense. But then again, maybe you have to think this through a tiny bit more and change the logic of your application or the architecture of your application. Just use static server-side rendering in certain parts and then again interactivity in other parts. But so far, I mean, .NET 8 is still quite new. In my experience, you can already do a lot with static server-side rendering, but we'll see what the future brings. Anyways, to disable pre-rendering, we just create a new instance of the interactive server render mode, and here then we can set pre-render to false. This is not really necessary. And now let's try that one more time. You see, this is the typical message when you're using WebSockets. And now we see this is the main layout in essence with the navigation bar, the sidebar. As you can see here, we have the nav menu. That's the name I was looking for. We have the body, which is empty in that case. And then also here an unhandled error has occurred. So everything is displayed here as well. And then after a certain while, we, well, get the data and render it on the client. All right. So that's maybe the most important part about Blazor server, the Blazor server render mode. And the rest is, well, pretty much the same stuff you may already know from .NET 7. So we have all the video games. Now we want to get a single video game. And for that, we create a new page. So here, right click, add a new item. We could, of course, call that video game, or maybe just edit video game. So with that, then we can create. That's wrong. I actually wanted to create a new razor component. There it is. So now this is EditVideoGame. And here now what we can do is we can use that to, well, create a game and edit a game. And typically what I do is I add two routes. First one would be edit game without an ID. And the second one is actually edit game with an ID. So something like that. Again, not sure what the problem here is because the syntax highlighting should look a bit different. But let's see. Okay, this looks better. I really had to create this file again. So I deleted it and created it again. I don't know why. Sometimes this happens. So one pitfall in, I don't know, Visual Studio 2022. Although I think there is a, nope, it's the latest version in my case. 17.8, no, I think 17.8.2 is now also available. But that's just a side note. Anyways, so we've got the two page directives here, and I also want again I want to inject the video game service, call this video game service. And now let's do something crazy. Let's just implement all the CRUD operations already here in the interface and the service, shall we? So here now task video game to get game by ID async with the ID. Then what we can also do is add game async with a new video game, and then we can also add update game async with a video game and also an ID, the ID of the video game we want to update. And also what we can do is delete game async with again the ID. And now here we just implement the complete interface, and here now first a single game, we just say var game is now await context video game single or default async. Well, I like to use find async actually, that's the one with the ID, and here we just return the game. Could be null, I know, we should handle that maybe, but not in that tutorial. All right, then adding a game. So here now, what we can do is simply say context add, video games, and then add our game. And then we also have to save that, because with that, as you can see here, it just begins tracking the given entity, but it's not really added to our table. So here now we say await context and save changes async. All right, so this is what we want to do here. Then deleting, why not? We first try to find the game, and that'll be the one, and add the async keyword. And now if the game is not null, then we say context video games remove the game, and then also await context save changes async. Again, we should or could handle the null case, of course, in a more professional application. And then the last thing here would be similar actually. First we try to find the game with the given ID. We say async task, and here now let's call that the DB game for the database game. All right, and here now we say that the DB game title, for instance, is the game title, DB game publisher is the game publisher, and the DB game release year is the game release year. All right, so in essence, again, since we have .NET Web API capabilities here, it's pretty similar to a typical web API maybe, right? So you have your service here, but the big difference is that we can directly access this service, inject this service, since we are already on the server with Blazor server here and also Blazor static server-side rendering. So this is again the big difference to WebAssembly. Usually in WebAssembly you would of course have a controller here, and you can do that here as well. You can, for instance, just create your controllers folder, add a new folder, call it controllers, and then here you get the suggestion to create a new controller, of course, right? So this is everything. You can do that, absolutely. But since we are again already on the server, this is what we have to do here, and I hope I implemented everything properly. So now we can do everything we have to do here on the client. So what we need is, first, I want to check, do we have an ID or not? So if the ID is null, in that case, this means we want to add a new video game. So H3, add a new video game, and same thing for the page title. And I see that we have an error there, of course, because we need the ID here as a parameter. So prop nullable int ID, and this is a parameter. So with that attribute, we make sure that this thingy here works. All right. And then we have the else case. So if the ID is not null, we can actually copy that, paste it here. We need another member here, another property, which is the current game actually. So prop video game and then the current game. All right. And this thing is just a new game. All right. And here now we say we want to edit at current game title actually. All right. So edit title, that's that. And now here to get the current game, we will use another lifecycle method, and this is the on parameters set async. So protect it, override, and then on parameter set async, and here now we have our video game service. So if ID is not null, then we say var game is await video game service, this one here, get game by ID async with the given ID, which we cast into an integer, not nullable. And if the game is not null, then we say our current game is this beautiful game. All right. Okay, I think we can test that already. Nope, we can't, because we first need an edit button. And this is what I wanted to add here. So here now we just add another column. And this is now big difference to server-side rendering, because here we just used a link. Can still do that as well. Maybe it's the easier way. But since we now have interactivity anyways, we can also use a button to call a function that then uses the navigation manager to navigate to that page. You see, maybe it's a bit too complicated. You can do it simpler with static server-side rendering. But again, that's totally up to you. Again, button, and this button has an on-click event, and here we say add. We want to use a parameter. That's why we use this syntax here. And let's just call this method then. We want edit game with now the game ID. And of course we have to use the lambda expression here. Edit game is not available yet, but in a sec. So edit game with the ID here. And to be able to navigate the user now, we inject the navigation manager, almost navigation manager. All right. And here now we say navigation manager. When we properly write this, navigation manager, navigate to, and now it's edit game with the ID. Okay, hopefully this is correct. And as you can see now, maybe it's a bit too much, right? So we can, of course, also add a class. Maybe for design purposes, it is the right way. Button primary, again, bootstrap class here. And we call this maybe edit, or we could add an icon, something like that. Let's test that now. So we run the app. There it is. We go to games. We're loading the video games. We have our edit button here. We go to edit and we're navigating to the page. Okay. Same thing here and here. But what about now creating a game? Well, let's do that as well real quick. So let's just copy that and add a method called createGame with no parameter. And we just navigate to edit game, no parameter again. And now maybe down here, we add another button, add a new game. And here on click, we call create, or maybe add game. I think this is the better name here, add game. All right, try this one more time. And there we are, add a new game. You see the class is now not set. So maybe here, button primary, save that, restart the app one more time, add a new game, and we see now this works as well. And let me real quick remove the delay here. So this is a little bit quicker. All right, now edit, add, works. Great. Thanks to interactivity, because if we would now disable that, let's just test that real quick. We restart the application. Now we get the data, but the buttons do not work. See that? So in this case now, our options are, and you can see that in the other tutorial, our options are to just use an A tag with an href, or we use an actual form that, well, where a button is used for a submit. So we have a submit button in that case, and we are submitting a form, and this thing then can be used to, well, do something. All right, anything actually. Okay, so that's that. Now we can go back to the EditVideoGame Razor component, and here now we add the EditForm. So this is pretty straightforward. We have the EditForm here, built-in component of Blazor. Nothing new in .NET 8, except you're using, again, static server-side rendering. But what you also always and still need is a model. So our model here is the current game. And on submit, this is also still the same. We could also use validation. So on valid submit is also available here. We call a method called handle submit, which is not available yet, but will be in a couple of minutes. First, all that stuff that we want to set here. So first a label, for instance, for the title, call this title. And for the title, we use the built-in input text component. Here now again, ID is title. We bind the value current game title, all right, and use the class form control. Okay, and now we can actually copy that for the publisher. So this is pretty much the same stuff. Publisher, same thing here, publisher, okay. And again, almost the same stuff. Now it's an input number field if you want. For the release year, so release year it is here, and let's call that release year as well, and release year. And the last thing we need is a button again of type submit, and this is default, by the way, so you actually don't have to define the type, but I don't know, I'm used to it because sometimes I added other buttons to the form, and if I don't set the type then, because in that case you would have to set the type button, because otherwise every button is a submit button. Just a little side note again. And we call this save, and class again button primary. Okay, now the handle submit method. So let's do that here. Async task handle submits, and here again we have to decide is the ID null or not. If it is not null, we want to update, right? So we could of course add another method for that, and here now we want to add a game. So regarding adding, this is easy. Of course, we just call await video game service and then add game async with our current game. And when this is done, I actually want to use the navigation manager again. Inject navigation manager, and here I say navigation manager. Jesus, navigation manager, so hard to write, right? Navigate to, and then back to the games, and actually it's the same thing, almost the same thing here. We just say update game with the current game and the ID, which is not null, of course. Okay, let's test that now. We restart the application. Now we go to Cyberpunk 2077. Let's just say it's now 2078. What was that? Post request does not specify. Of course, still server-side rendering. So as you can see, it would work. We just have to fix tiny things. We have to give this thing a name, a form name, then also add an attribute to this parameter, and this would work then. But since we don't want to use server-side rendering here, let's just see how this looks with interactive server, with the interactive server render mode. So we refresh or restart the application. We are here, 2078, and it's done. Okay, again, we go to edit. Now here, edit again, and now maybe let's add another game. For instance, The Witcher 3, CD Projekt again. Release was 2015, and there it is. And again, when we have a look here, actually, let's just refresh this. We have the data here already, right? But we see no flickering effect in this case. Okay, maybe what if we go to home, and then back to games, and then edit. Well, of course we have no link here, so at least I don't see something strange happening here. Now the question is, what happens if we use the same render mode with no pre-rendering? So let me just copy that here. Now go back to EditVideoGame, restart the application. There we are. Again, the result is actually different. Okay, games 1, see that? But at least I don't see the difference in that case. So again, I leave that up to you, and I would really like to see or hear your opinions about the new server or the new render modes in general together with pre-rendering. What do you think about that? Anyways, last thing, deleting. And well, we can do it here or in the table. Maybe just do it here. So we can of course add, oh no, let's do that in the video games overview. So here we add another column and another button, which pretty much looks the same way, like that. And here now we say danger delete game, call this delete, add the method here. All right, delete game. And now here I actually want to call async task delete game, video game service delete, add the ID, and then actually we can call this again after deleting the game. So restart the application. Interactive server mode is still there. So we go to games and can actually close this and, for instance, delete Witcher again, and it's gone. So as you can see, we can refresh this, of course, the game is not there anymore. These are all the CRUD operations. Please tell me what you think about that and what you would do to improve that maybe. And what do you think about the new render modes and static server-side rendering and so on? Thank you very much for all your insights and your comments, and of course for your likes, and even maybe you want to subscribe to my channel. That would be amazing. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much to all my patrons for supporting me, and thank you very much for watching, and I hope I see you next time. Take care.